Maeve and David to be here with you this morning as you launch your annual report. The detail of it is really important so that we get a better insight into the experience of people who have been sexually abused, and what is the state in relation to services and therapy and counselling and their response to the therapy that you're offering and the support services. Thank you for your leadership in relation to that, Maeve, and your expertise, which is really important for us to hear about. And as you say, as Minister for Children, I'm very happy to work closely with your organisation in terms of developing the legislation. It's important legislation in terms of the mandatory provisions in relation to reporting. It's really important that we have that legislation, and I convey your concern to the Minister in relation to the full implementation of it. I'm struck, by what you say as well at the end of your press release, which is quite disturbing, really. You say, "I do not believe that people really appreciate how pervasive abuse is, how so many children are abused at home, and how devastating the impact is throughout a person's life. While this mindset persists, children will continue to be sexually abused." And again, I think it's a kind of another wake-up call in relation to sexual abuse and sexual abuse of children, and how seriously we, all of us, need to take this, and society as a whole, and how we need to take actions to prevent and interrupt, report, and make sure that people get help. Because I think you can never overestimate the anxiety, the trauma, the upset that people who've been sexually abused experience. And if we are to avoid it becoming a lifelong, as you say, burden on the person, and that's a difficult thing to achieve, we do need to make sure that we get the kind of help that 1 in 4 offers to people who have been sexually abused. I do note as well, though, Maeve, that you do say, and it's important to always try and have the balance, that you do say 2015 was a good year for survivors of sexual abuse, if indeed such a thing is possible. And as I've already said, I do accept that it is very difficult for people. But you do say there seems to have been a sea change in our understanding of the extent of sexual abuse in Ireland, and the need to be proactive both in terms of prevention and in responding to the needs of those who've been sexually harmed. And you say it as if the years of work by 1 in 4 and other organisations working with sexual violence have finally been mainstreamed through significant changes to legislation and statutory procedures. So I think we're continuing with those changes, Maeve, in the Sexual Offences Bill, which is before the Dáil, and which I hope will come back in the next week or two. We've started the discussion in the Dáil, it's already gone through the Senate. And there's very important changes in that legislation that really will make a difference. It is very disturbing to hear again what you've had to say about the criminal trial process for people. And we have to do everything possible to make it a better experience, a more protected experience, while acknowledging the rights of the accused. But that's why the victims legislation is so important, because that is about a sea change in our attitude to victims within the courts, within the criminal justice agencies, across the whole spectrum of people who are dealing with victims. The Victims Directive was important, and I will be publishing the victims legislation in the next few weeks. So again, that's about a sea change in the attitude of An Garda Síochána, the attitude of the criminal justice agencies. We've had a lot of stakeholder meetings with them to emphasise the importance of respecting victims, having a different approach to victims, because the whole justice system was not sensitive enough to victims in the past, and it has to be now. And it means changes in procedures, it means new insights, it means that victims have to be dealt with in a different way. And that's going to take time, but I think we will be laying out in the legislation, and it's already obligatory anyway, from the EU Victims Directive, and that's very important. So that's an important piece of legislation, and as I say, the sexual offences legislation as well. These will add to the points that Maeve has made about the changes that have already taken place. I note the points as well that you make in relation to getting help out to sex offenders. That is very important as well, and while it's disturbing to see the age profile of the sex offenders you're dealing with, the young men in particular you mentioned, it is a reality of sexual offending, that young men of that age are involved in sexual offending, some young men obviously, and that it's important, if we want to prevent them continuing, to be sex offenders, and we know this is a crime that often gets repeated again and again and again, that we try and work with these young men while they are still young. And it's great to see the programme that you're doing, the Phoenix programme. I'd like to see it being supported. I'd like to see it developing around the country, because if we are to look to the future and prevent further sexual abuse, that is what we need to do. And we do need to be conscious of the dangers of the internet. It's fantastic. The internet obviously opens up all sorts of possibilities for people, but clearly some will misuse it, and it can, as you say, be an impetus towards abuse. But of course we did have abuse ever before the internet. So let's not say that it's the internet only is responsible. This is a crime that predates the internet, and young men and others have been offending for a long time, as we know, in Ireland. And it is striking again to say that much offending takes place within the family. We do have to be conscious of that, and that's where reporting becomes important, and giving other family members the confidence to take action. So there's a lot of issues that are still ongoing. I do want to mention the therapeutic interventions that you make, other ones as well as the Phoenix programme. And as you say, the totality of your work is encapsulated in the statement on your website, Sexual Abuse from Surviving to Living. And I think that's very important, because it speaks of your work to move those affected by these terrible crimes from being survivors to living the fullest lives possible. And that's really important, as I have already said. You have mentioned the new Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act. Just to say a little bit about the changes that will bring about. The changes, for example, in relation to disability mean that the law will not presume that the existence of a disability implies a lack of capacity to consent. It criminalises the purchase of sexual services. I'm convinced that these provisions are necessary to tackle the exploitation that's associated with prostitution. There's a number of new offences which will see recruiting or causing a child to participate in a pornographic performance becoming a specific offence, and so on. More protection in relation to counselling notes. I think it's really important that victims feel they can go along to a professional counsellor, and that there will be safeguards in terms of the use of the material that they have given in confidence to a professional person. It will undermine all counselling and all encouragement for victims to go and get help if we don't deal with that, and it is being dealt with in the new legislation. We also need to support the work organisations like 1 and 4 are doing, and as Maeve has said, I recognise the importance of that and have made sure there's another 250,000 for the organisations working with victims in the budget that we announced yesterday. So look, I mean, this is a very important area. This is critical work that you're doing in 1 and 4. You do it to the highest professional standard. That's why I'm delighted to be here today to officially launch your report, and to wish you the very best going forward, and to hope that, you know, the next year will increasingly see people getting support from you, and the public making sure that they report crimes where they know a crime to be committed, and that we can make further inroads so that people who have been sexually abused feel that they can go out and get help, that the perpetrators will be brought to justice, and that their dreadful experience will be somewhat mitigated by the kind of help that they receive. Thank you very much for being here this morning.